I spent the 30 days following my notice to try to figure out where I was going to go next. I had this last sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find another apartment. I called up all of the apartments in my area. Nobody had anything available that was smaller and cheaper than what I was living in at the time, which was a 2-2 apartment. Nothing was available, not for at least a couple months. And honestly, the thought of locking myself into a rental agreement at that point, especially with like non-stable, non-predictable income, wasn't the most favorable. So I guess it worked out the way it was supposed to, with me not getting into another lease. I won't lie though, I did feel a little bit defeated. I was willing to make big changes to turn my whole situation around, but I was really hoping that I wouldn't have to do something that drastic. So I nervously moved on to the idea of sleeping in my car. I had been almost obsessively watching van life videos on YouTube for months prior to that. I was very enamored by the clever way that they turned a vehicle on wheels into a comfy, cozy, storage happy living space. I don't know why I said storage happy. But you get what I mean. If you've ever seen a van life video before, they completely strip down the inside of the van. They insulate it. They put flooring in it. They wire it for electricity. They set up plumbing. They've got a shower, a toilet, a kitchen area, a sink, like a bed. Like what else did I need at that point, right? That would have been perfect for me. So I was really sold on the idea of transforming a vehicle into a home for myself. I was already a huge fan of tiny homes at that point, but with a vehicle, I could be mobile and I wouldn't have to worry about plopping a home down on a plot of land somewhere. So at that point, I knew that living in my car is what I was going to do. I started Googling car life, looking for tips and tricks and techniques, especially around privacy and safety. And I found answers to questions I didn't even know I was supposed to ask. Thank God for Google, right? Everything you need to know is on the internet. I came across several YouTubers who had made permanent modifications to their car in order to live in it, but I knew that that wasn't for me. See, by then, I had been a rideshare driver for more than 3 years. So I knew that I needed to keep my car in the format that it comes in. So I wasn't about to remove any seats or build out any platforms or anything of that sort. So by the time the last few days in my apartment rolled around, I did feel very prepared for what I was about to embark upon. I had dropped off a good portion of my belongings at local donation centers, knowing that I just didn't want to pack everything up. And I brought everything else over to a storage unit that I secured. By moving day, which was a couple days before I had to turn my keys in, I was all packed up. I was ready to go. I was about as ready as I was gonna get. When the moving help that I hired arrived at my apartment, this is where I had to be strategic. I had to tell them which items to pack last into the storage unit when they got there, because those were items that I was gonna have to access on a day-to-day basis. I'm talking clothes, shoes, hygiene products, things that you reach for every single day in your bathroom, in your bedroom, what have you. Now that I wasn't gonna have a bathroom or a bedroom, I had to be able to access that easily in my storage unit. Thankfully, that part did go smoothly, and I never ended up having to climb over boxes to get to anything, except for one time I had to get to my like passport, or maybe it was like my birth certificate or something like that, because that was in like my file cabinet box. But yeah, pretty much everything I needed was right at hand, available for me to reach for. A huge part of what made my car life transition easier was finding a car life buddy, a neighbor, I'll call him, who also had chosen car life the way that I had. They didn't want to spend money on rent. Instead, they wanted to put that money toward saving and investing and building up future business. Remember, all of this was during the panorama, the end of 2020. So everyone's pockets were hurting around this time. Well, I'll say most of us. It's funny because the only reason I found out that they were also a car lifer is because usually we would hang out at my place. And so I had to tell them, like, hey, we can't hang out here anymore because I'm going to move out. And I remember feeling like so embarrassed and silly. I don't want to say stupid, but kind of. I felt that way to admit that, like, I was letting my apartment go because I couldn't afford it. Like, what adult can't afford their own place to live? That's what I was thinking at that time. So once I revealed that to them, and that I was kind of nervous about it, having never done it before, they were like, well, why don't you ask somebody who is already doing it for advice? And I was like, I don't know anybody. And they were like, you know me. And that was the wildest way to find out because I never would have known. But that's kind of the whole name of the game. The whole point is to be covert. The whole point is to not be obvious that you're living in your car. I was definitely surprised, but I was also very happy that I wasn't going to have to go through this thing all by myself, that I had a neighbor and a friend in it. I ended up living in my car from September of 2020 through October of 2022. So a total of 25 months. And when I started, I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I didn't have a time frame in mind. I knew I was hustling though. I was not unemployed any of that time. I was working. I was working long shifts. I was working late shifts. I was working 5 to 6 days a week. I was making sure that I stayed on top of my car payments and my insurance. I was feeding myself. I was paying all of my bills. I just couldn't afford rent. Nobody knew that I was living in my car except for my neighbor. And the main reason for that is I didn't want my immediate family to worry about me, especially because they really couldn't help me. So they'd be worrying for nothing. They couldn't pay my rent for me, and they couldn't offer me a place to live because they didn't have space in their homes. Even if they did have space, they lived out of state, and I wasn't gonna move away from my son just to have a roof over my head. I'd rather be in the same city, the same state as my child, and have that access to him physically than leave the state. So I made up this story that I was crashing with a friend I had made through a real estate investing networking event, whose name I had mentioned before. So it made the story a little bit more believable. But it got a little sketchy when my dad would sometimes ask me questions about what exactly my setup was. Was I sleeping on the couch, or did I have a bedroom? Was I able to cook? Was it a bother that I was coming in late at night after working? Those questions kind of threw me off sometimes. I had to scramble and think of an answer that would make sense. That reminds me, one of the biggest challenges of living in my car was not having a kitchen to cook in. I'm not an eating out type of girly. I like to cook, and I cook almost every day, or I'm eating the leftovers that I made. So if you can imagine 25 months of almost exclusively eating out, and the few exceptions to eating fast food, because normally that's what was open late at night after working. Few exceptions were like eating shelf-stable grocery store food. So sometimes I would go to the grocery store and I would get like bread, peanut butter, canned veggies, those rice packets. And thankfully the Quick Trip gas stations, they have a microwave. So I would just use their microwave to heat up some food sometimes. But 9 times out of 10, I was eating fast food. And if you can imagine what eating fast food every day for 25 months does to your body and your health, man, I'm still struggling with the weight that I put on. I used to be fit. I used to be moving around a lot doing the real estate thing. Still got some weight on me that I can't quite shake. Let me know down in the comments how you would have dealt with that. Like, would eating Waffle House and Cookout and pizza from the late night pizza spot every day, just about for 25 months, have been cool with you? Or would you have been losing your mind like I was? And I couldn't afford like the better food that cost more money because I was on a tight budget. I also mentioned in part one that my son was not okay. There was a situation that happened in January of 2021, the same month that I sold the Urban Jungle Rehab Project. Um, it was a mental health scare that his father and I experienced with him, and I remember him being very calm and unemotional in the conversation that we had on our way to the facility. I had never been in the throes of a situation like this with a loved one before, so it was all very jarring for me, especially him being so quiet about it. I remember once he got there, I was calling him twice a day, just to check on him, talk to him, make sure he was getting what he needed. At that time, it was the panorama, so visitors were not allowed. I can't even express the anxiety that I was experiencing while he was there. I mean, if you're a parent or an aunt or a sibling, I think you can probably imagine like leaving your child somewhere and not being able to be with them, especially in a time like that. Um, I cried so many tears. I prayed so many prayers. I listened to so many gospel songs. Just anything that I could do to keep my mind right and focused on him getting well and me not just crumpling into a ball of uselessness. Those prayers and those gospel songs, they definitely kept my mind right. Long story short, we came through that extremely stressful situation, scary situation, with an understanding of what triggered those feelings for him, what extra support he needed, what we could do going forward to make sure that this wasn't an experience for him again. Ever since that incident, I've been extra attentive to asking him if he's doing okay, how he's feeling. And since we've always really had the kind of relationship where we talk candidly about pretty much anything and everything, it's been pretty easy to have those kinds of conversations with him. And he's even revealed to me, some things that I wouldn't have thought he had strong feelings about or he had concerns about. It was definitely an eye-opening experience for me, and all in all, I am so glad that Cam is still here. I'm glad that he is well. I don't know what I would have done on top of all of the other chaos that was going on at that point in my life. I don't know how I would have dealt. I love that kid to death, so I'm so glad that he's still here and that he's good. When I say that my love for him is infinite, I mean it. So ultimately, there were quite a few lessons learned here as a takeaway for me. Accountability was huge on the side of the Urban Jungle Rehab Project going wrong. All of the people that worked on the project that I was slow to fire after being quick to hire, that impacted the budget, the timelines, and ultimately the success of the project. And what that meant for my finances was a terrible situation that led me to not be able to afford housing anymore. And so that's what brought me to living in my car for 25 months. So I had to figure out at that point where to go next with my life, what I was going to do next. I did decide that I wanted to still be in the real estate space in some way. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that happen at that time. It just wasn't in the cards for me at that point. Honestly, it is still something that I'm very interested in. As I mentioned in previous videos, like I felt a lot of passion about it. It was something that I wanted to do with my life. It was something that gave me purpose. I still very much have that interest. Of course, with all of the lessons I've learned being in that space for years, I feel like it would be a much different experience if I were to jump into it at some point in the future. But at that point, I wasn't able to do that. And then what was going on with my son at that time was another like huge thing on top of my own personal life chaos. Again, super grateful that, you know, he's good now, but that was a real tearjerker, a real eye opener, a real shocker. So it kind of felt like everything was kind of crumbling, and because I wasn't stable in my own life, I kind of felt like I wasn't able to show up as my best self as a parent for my son. That was something that I kind of had to sit in and think about for a while as well. But yeah, ultimately, I think the overarching lesson learned here, the overarching takeaway was being accountable for what I undertook, all of the decisions I made along the way, all of the ways that I spent the funds for the project, and the fact that it didn't go the way that I wanted it to go, despite all of my research, despite my efforts. But ultimately, that was on me because it was my project. That's kind of what I was left with at the end. It was a rough time. It was a rough time. I will not lie, it was a rough time, but I'm grateful to not be in that space anymore. I definitely was interested, very interested in van life. That would have been a lot more comfortable than being in my car, even though it is super spacious. And thankfully, I still have this car, it's still running and everything. But the van would have been a much better alternative. I just financially couldn't make that happen at that point. But that would have been ideal, and I would have undertaken the build out of it myself as well. This car held me over. Thankfully, it's spacious. The trunk space, the cabin space, it's a spacious car. It worked out. It did what it needed to. Anyway, let me not talk your ear off. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you.